Now, for sending a HTTP request, we can use the fetch function. That's a default JavaScript function built into JavaScript. It has nothing to do with React. It's a standard JavaScript function supported in modern browsers. And it is a function that allows us to send HTTP requests. We could also use third-party packages like Axios, which is also a popular library for sending HTTP requests, but I don't want to install an extra library here, so I'll stick to fetch. Now, fetch wants an argument, and the first argument should be a string. It should be the URL to which we want to send a request. And here, that's that URL which we get from the Firebase Real-Time Database console. Now, this Firebase Real-Time Database service works such that this URL can be manipulated. We can add segments after this domain, and then these segments will be translated into folders, you could say, in your database, into tables, you could say. So we could send a request to this URL /meetups, and that would add a meetups table, a meetups collection to that database here. And hence I'll do that here. Now, one special thing about this Firebase API is that you need to add .json at the end here. That's not React specific, that's just something Firebase requires. And with that, that is the URL to which we're sending our request. But here, I actually wanna store data on Firebase servers. And to signal to Firebase and to this API that we wanna store data, we actually must send a POST request. And by default, fetch sends a GET request. And that will always depend on the API you're working with, but most APIs are built such that storing data requires POST requests. Now, to send a POST instead of a GET request, we add a second argument to fetch here. And that second argument is an object which allows us to configure this fetch function call and this HTTP request, therefore. And here in this object, we can, for example, set a method property to define the HTTP method that will be used. And here we can set this to POST instead of GET, which would be the default. So here we use POST instead. Now, when we send a POST request, we should also add the data to the request, the data which we want to store. And we do that through the body field, which we add to this second argument, to this configuration object. Now, body wants the data we want to append, and that data should typically be in JSON format, which is a very popular, the most popular, I would argue, data format for transmitting data with HTTP requests. And in JavaScript, we can easily create JSON by using the built-in JSON object and calling the stringify method. And to stringify, we can pass default JavaScript objects or arrays or values in general, and they will be converted to JSON. So here we could pass our meetup data object, which we're getting as a parameter, as an argument to the stringify method. Now, last but not least, we can add some extra headers if we want to, and for example, add the content type header and set it to application/JSON to add this extra metadata to the outgoing request and make it crystal clear that this request carries JSON data. Some APIs also require this. And with that, we're sending such a POST request. We can do more with fetch. We can listen to the success and error cases, and we do that in the full React course, which I offer. But for the moment here, this is actually enough because this will already send a POST request with our data to Firebase. And hence now here, if we save this and I click on Add Meetup Now with data entered, we don't see any feedback here. We'll work on that in a second. But if we go to Firebase, we see that there's a new Meetups node. And in that node, we got this cryptic ID here, which is actually auto-generated by Firebase. And if we expand this, we see our submitted data. So storing that data on Firebase servers works. Now let's work on the feedback which we provide to the user here when we add a meetup.